Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Dr. Glenn is a clinical psychologist and former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leaving the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Before we get started, if you haven't downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Hey, it's the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston with defeatyourcravings.com. And I'm here with one of my favorite people, Fiona, who was originally a reader and then a user of the methods and derived a lot of benefit from herself, and then approached me as a coach way back when. This was, I think, back in 2017, and has really been with me since the beginning. And she's recently, as is her bent, discovered a new little thing that's working for her and some of her clients. And I asked her on to talk about it today. Do I have that right, Fiona?
You do. Thank you. And thanks for giving a bit of background about where I'm at. And yeah, so I've been working for Your Good Self for about just over 6 years, I think. And I think I discovered the book and the method about 6 months previous to that. When I first read the book and started putting it into practice, I felt as if it was all really simple, really, really simple. And I remember posting something about it on the Facebook forum about how easy it all was. And I got a couple of really sarcastic comments back from other people. So I kind of kept my mouth shut after that. But I soon discovered it wasn't quite as easy as I thought. It was more of a process. So it's been about discovering over the years what works for me, what doesn't work for me. Basically, it's changed my life. It has changed my life. So it's been a very long time since I've binged, but there have been other kind of smaller problems along the way.
Mm-hmm. Like what?
So the main problems have really been overeating on kind of healthy foods, and I had an evening snacking habit. I think I just kind of accepted both of these habits as just, well, I don't binge anymore. I'm not 70 pounds overweight anymore. I'm doing pretty well, so that's just part and parcel. But then about 2 years ago, I think it was, I stopped eating after 7 p.m. That was a game changer. And I've never to this day eaten one morsel of food after 7 p.m. unless
Really?
I've been away from home. Yeah, never. It's just...
I didn't know that.
No, it's 7 p.m. It's time to stop eating. So that was a game changer because my binge habit was mostly performed in secret. It was mostly at night. I usually did okay during the day, probably because I was probably starving myself during the day. But I couldn't stop eating at night. So when I started implementing all the methods, then I kind of stopped that, but I was still grazing on food. I was still looking for food at night, and I didn't really like it.
Fiona, what do you do when you go out to eat if your husband wants to go out or something?
If we go out to eat, that's fine. I've got a conditional rule that if I'm out to eat, I can eat after 7 p.m. or if I'm in somebody else's house or if I'm on vacation.
I got you. Okay,
Yeah,
that makes
so
sense.
it's just 7 p.m. at home. And I always make sure that I've eaten before 7 p.m.
Okay, so whenever you have control, you don't eat after 7 p.m.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So over the years, I've developed pretty good routines with food. There are some things I just don't eat. I always make pretty healthy choices when I'm out. I'm always very well prepared with both food choices and availability of food. Never had a really detailed food plan. It's more about just implementing a couple of rules that really worked for me, and the 7 p.m. was one of them. If you were to ask my friends what I was like with food, they'd probably say I was always really well prepared and I take food everywhere. I think if you asked anybody, they would say that about me.
That's a really helpful quality. I always say, a scuba diver doesn't go out without their oxygen tank.
Yeah. But there's another part to that. So I've kind of, over the years, I worked for a big weight loss company and that I kind of behaved like that then as well. But over the years, I've got more prepared and it's just been like routine and this is what I do. But a few months ago, I started thinking about something that we often say to our clients, and it's that hunger's not a real emergency. One of the things we teach people is to make food decisions in advance and to be prepared as far as possible with food. And this can be really sort of life-changing because then people, they don't have to rely on their impulses. That's what we teach people, and that's what I've taught myself. But I always had this feeling or this fear that hunger was an emergency, even though I didn't recognise it. I've said that a lot to our clients. I thought I really believed it. I thought I was practising what I preached. But it wasn't until I started to put into practice that I realised that I hadn't been practising it at all. I was kind of brought up to believe that you should eat everything that was put in front of you because there were people dying of starvation in the world. Sadly, that's very true, even today. But what I eat or what I don't eat is not going to have an impact on anyone else but me.
I never really understood how it helped the starving kids in Asia.
No, I know. But it's just something that a lot of people, like your age, my age, have just been brought up to
It's
believe
in your
that.
soul if you're brought up in that era. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started to think I've probably been conditioned to have a fear of hunger. And one thing, my weight's been okay for a long time, but it does go up and down a bit. I've never been completely happy with it, but I've just accepted it's so much better than being 70 pounds overweight with a serious binge problem. I'd routinely gain 2 or 3 pounds, lose it again, and sometimes I'd go up as much as 7 or 8 on vacation, and then I would drain it back. But never really saw that as a problem. And then one day a few months ago, I was at a point where I was feeling really annoyed with myself because my weight was up slightly again. And I started thinking about the hunger situation and how I would never ever let myself get hungry because I had a fear of it. And I was always prepared with food. I lead a very busy life. I work from home, but I'm also out and about quite a lot. So sometimes I've got to eat on the go. I'd always take food with me. If I was out in the car, I would always have a cup of coffee with me or something. I knew where to stop and buy food that would stave off the hunger till I got home. It was all good food. It was fruit, might be protein, and it was definitely never a binge. So this was not a binge problem, not about a binge problem. Basically, any time I got thoughts of hunger, I would eat, or I would white knuckle it until I could eat my meal. And yes, I was eating sufficient breakfast, sufficient lunch, and sufficient dinner, because that's probably a question you would ask me if you were talking to me, Glenn.
Of course, yeah.
Yep. So as I said, it's been a bit of a process. A lot of thought has gone into this. So I started telling myself over and over and over again that a little bit of hunger was not an emergency. I didn't have to jump out of the car and go and buy something because I was hungry. I could wait till I get home for my dinner. I didn't need to drive through Starbucks for a coffee to stave off the hunger. And disclaimer here, I love coffee and going to Starbucks is okay for me now and again. But I was using coffee as a stopgap to kind of stop the hunger. I also didn't need to eat something as soon as I walked through the door of my kitchen, because when I walked through the door of my home, I would go straight to the kitchen and I would start thinking about food, dinner, and what I could eat. I could cook my meal and enjoy it, and I could even enjoy it even more because I was feeling hungry. I was ready for it. One question might be, could I have done all this by adding some extra rules? Yeah, I probably could have done. And I've played about with other rules over time. But as I said, I was quite happy with the status quo and never really saw it as a problem until I started thinking about the hunger thing.
And so you started saying hunger is not an emergency?
Yeah. So I know that if you tell yourself something over and over again, you start to believe it. So that's why I kept saying to myself, hunger's not an emergency. You can wait. You don't need this right now. You don't need to go buy X, Y, and Z. You do not need to go straight into the kitchen when you go home. You can go upstairs, you can do something else. And I started realising that after an hour or so, I was okay. Nothing bad had happened. It wasn't an emergency. I could go eat my meal and I was absolutely fine.
Imagine that.
Yeah. And I was about 3 weeks into this process, or experiment, or whatever you like to call it. And I noticed I had a real sense of peace and calm about me. And I'm putting this down to my brain previously being on a really high alert for hunger signals all the time. So once I'd taken the hunger pangs, the hunger signals out of the equation and seen them for what they were, I started feeling this real sense of peace and calm. And I'd say this is about 12 weeks ago. So within the first 2 weeks, I lost a few pounds, which had been plaguing me for several years. Since then, I've been on a week's vacation in Croatia where I was surrounded with lovely food, and at no point did I feel like overeating. I gained 0.5 pound on that vacation, which is something totally unique for me because I usually gain about 5 or 6 in a week. I'm leaving food on the plate when I've had enough, which I've never done in my life before. I was at an event last night where there was a beautiful buffet with lots of healthy choices, and I had no sense of temptation whatsoever. I ate one small item, and that was it. My weight is completely stable. I feel calm, and the best thing of all is I don't feel like this is a temporary fix. I feel like this is it forever. Does that make sense?
Fiona, it makes total sense because I think you've really captured the essence of the overeating problem. Do you want to say more? It sounds like you had this organized a little bit. I don't want to stop your flow.
Yeah, so there's one more thing. So I wouldn't want to encourage people not to be prepared with food because remember, this has taken me 6.5 years to get to this point. And I've had a lot of peace and calm in my life before that. This is just the next step for me. So I wouldn't want to put people off being prepared with food, making food choices in advance, making rules, making decisions in advance, because that works. And that has worked for me for a long time. This is just the next step in the process for me, and hopefully the last step.
Because the idea is not really to see how tough you can be and how much hunger you can tolerate. The idea is to do what you can when you can to regularly and reliably feed yourself, and then work on calming down that false reaction of emergency so you can be more at peace with being hungry sometimes. In the very beginning, I remember saying that most people, to transform their bodies and their relationship with food, they have to find some way to enjoy their hunger. And I think this is your way of explaining that experience. Did you want to say more? You sound like you really had something to say here.
One thing I'm enjoying the feeling of being thinner. My clothes fit me better, and yeah, it's only a few pounds, but that few pounds has been plaguing me for years. Just on and off and on and off. I never saw myself as being a yo-yo dieter the last few years, but obviously there's been some aspect of that creeping in. But now I just feel really like this is me, this is the way I'm supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be thinking about food all the time. My husband has probably noticed there's less food in the fridge because I'm not going shopping all the time. But that's not my problem. There's plenty of food there. I will never be starving and I will always eat my meals. So it's not about making myself deliberately hungry. That's not a problem for me.
Mm-hmm. Can I say a few things?
You can.
Like I said, I think you're capturing the essence of food problems. People experience that false state of emergency in different ways. For a lot of people, it's the screw it, just do it experience, right? I don't care about all the plans I made. I don't care about what impact this has. I need that cookie. I need that ice cream. And obviously, we would translate to that to their pay killing them to break the rules, et cetera, et cetera. But people experience that state of emergency in different ways. Some people experience it in terms of a franticness to be prepared and shopping all the time. And that's a decent place to put that energy, but it's still a feeling that's difficult to manage. Some people experience it as a fear of financial insecurity. Some people experience it as physical anxiety. Their heart beats a little bit more, they get sweaty, or they have a little trouble thinking. But the essence of it is if you find yourself consistently breaking your rules or going beyond your own best judgment about what you've carefully considered would be the best way for you to eat, then the odds are that there is this underlying anxiety, there is this underlying false alarm that says that hunger is an emergency. The longer that I do this, the more years and the more clients that I talk to, and the more I kind of consider my psychological background, the more that I see that really overcoming overeating and just becoming a different person with food, having a different relationship with food, involves reversing that reaction. And so one of the mantras that worked for me was to say, I have everything I need right now. I found that the breathing that I learned in yoga made a big difference. When you breathed in for shorter than you breathed out, Larry Hammond calls them 7-11 breaths. I found that that made a big difference. I found that getting out by the ocean made a big difference. I found sometimes a certain connectedness with the right people would make a big difference because there is a human need for connectedness. But hunger is not an emergency, and we all have to come to that in our own way. And it sounds like you really have worked that out for yourself. I feel like I've mostly worked that out for myself. There are times when it feels like hunger is an emergency, and I don't really have volume control limits, so my weight fluctuates up a little bit sometimes, and then I have to institute a limit or stop having nuts or seeds or something for a while to bring it back down. I am aware that it's a process of learning to calm down those little fires, enjoy your hunger, enjoy your capacity to feel your body's cravings, feel it being alive, and knowing that it's not an emergency. I think that's a really good reminder. I think it's a really perfect illustration of what I'm trying to do in Defeat Your Cravings that I really didn't get to do in the first books. So what else should I ask you about this?
Just another comment. So many people come to us with a real fear of hunger. They're terrified of hunger. It doesn't need to be like that. You don't need to be frightened of hunger. But again, it's a process. Once you recognize that nothing bad is going to happen to you once you do allow yourself to be hungry, then I think that could be a game changer for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And it interestingly and intriguingly opens up the possibility that maybe you're reacting in other ways across your life with that false sense of emergency. Maybe you got a bill that you can really handle if you sit down and plan it out. But the moment you open it up, you get this little mini heart attack.
Yeah, had that before.
Oh, I mean, I was $700,000 in debt at one point. So I've been there and done that and got the t-shirt. Or maybe there's situations with your kids, particularly if you have multiple small children, where it feels like a panic, but then you recognize that you're perfectly capable of doing it. Hunger's not an emergency. I have everything I need right now. Or whatever mantra works for you. Coupled with authentic self-care and regular, reliable nutrition can work wonders.
Do you think if you keep saying something over and over again to yourself that you start to believe it? Because I know people say negative things to themselves over and over again, and then they eventually believe what they're saying to themselves. So if you can say something really positive like this, that'll make a difference, just keep repeating it over and over, then you start to believe that it's true.
I think that that's very true. Okay, Fiona, thank you so much for doing this. Is there anything else that you wanted to share or ask me about or talk about?
No, that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. If you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.